Stay more comfortable, more concealed, and in the stand longer with Osseo gear. Premium camouflage apparel created for bow hunters by bow hunters. Osseo's revolutionary patented camo patterns and innovative features are designed to keep whitetail bow hunters totally invisible and dead quiet. Elevate your game with Osseo. Visit asiogear.com and take 20% off your purchase with code TRUTH20. Mobile hunters, our buddies over at Tethered, are always innovating to keep us more mobile and in the game when it counts. From the Tethered One Sticks, the Fast Pack, to the Ultra Lock saddle, Tethered is always designing to increase comfort and utility while reducing bulk, weight, and fiddle factor of mobile hunting gear. And now, they've outdone themselves yet again by creating the carbon fiber forged Predator CFX platform, the latest fully featured mobile saddle platform that raises the bar for what's possible in mobile hunting gear. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old tree climbing veteran, go to tetherednation.com for all your saddle hunting gear. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth I'm Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I've got my good buddy on. You know him, you love him, you'll recognize his face. We're going to be reunited this year again, which feels good. But my brother, Mr. Chad Sylvester, what's going on, man?
Not too much, brother. What's happening out east?
Good. Just chilling here out east, man, enjoying the heat. Got that heat index of over 100 or whatever it's been, man. It's like I can't wait for the 32 degree mornings and evenings. They can't get here soon enough because I'm done with the heat. Dude,
it's coming. It's like 70 days till September, dude, and we'll be in the mountains.
I know, right? I was gonna tell you so what we've been up to out east here is, this is kind of like the time frame for me where I back burner hunting just a little bit. Usually most of my work's done, right? And so family time, family vacation, double down on maybe gym time, especially as September's coming up, getting ready for that. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But the past, I don't know what it is, but I don't usually get allergies, right? But whenever the humidity gets really, really bad, my one ear is messed up from wrestling in high school. I got slammed at one point on my head, whipped my head to the mat, and something popped in my ear. And so ever since then it's been messed up. So I don't really get allergies, but whenever it gets really hot and humid, that ear gets plugged up. And so sometimes, I'll have to wake up in the morning and I'll have to pull it and stuff like that to kind of get it to pop or whatever. Cause it just sounds like someone pressed the center part of my ear in, is what it sounds like when I woke up. But I got choked so hard last night at jiu-jitsu that I went part deaf in that ear. To where I woke up this morning and it still isn't right. I've been spending all day pulling on it, trying to get it to work again, and it won't. Dude just straight up choked me deaf. That's the first time it's happened to me. It's I've been almost unconscious before, but I've never been choked deaf. That's you got it good when you can't hear after someone chokes you out.
That's funny. I see you got a little cauliflower ear going on a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. This one is the worst of the two. This one I got it, and then it I don't drain them just because I feel I've had buddies that drain them and then they look even worse. Oh, and really? Then, yeah, typically, especially if you have someone who doesn't know what the hell they're doing, the doctor, because they suture it weird and it'll make it all kind of messed up. But a lot of times, they'll get it again or whatever. And so my buddies that wrestled and stuff like that have it, it's a lot of them never drained it. And if you don't, it just gets hard. And then that part doesn't really ever get cauliflower ear again, or it doesn't blow up again. This one didn't blow up that bad. This one, after the last tournament, got I think I sent you pictures. It got all ballooned up and real big, and I just had to let it ride. And so this one is pretty jacked up to where it's definitely not right. I got the thick Rick on this side. You know what I mean?
My 8-year-old son's getting to the point where I had to let him know 2 life lessons. If a dude has a crooked nose or messed up ears, you don't pick fights, man.
I think I sent you that meme. It was a guy with messed up ears said, guy with ears like this has 110% chance of kicking your ass. Yeah. Or something like that, which is true, cause you see dudes roll in with a cauliflower ear, even in the gym or whatever. You're all right, that guy, he's probably got some, he's probably got some smoke. Yeah. It's even if he's newer, it's all right, he's been doing it long enough to get some beat up ears. So it's he probably got a few skills at least, But yeah, man. So what else is going on with you outside of my cauliflower ear? I know you don't, it looks like your nose is straight still, or has been not broken since, for a while, no more teeth have been busted. Yeah, maybe we'll have a throwdown this year when we're hunting together. I told Prophet that they're going to have like a Royal Rumble between the three of us if all three of us are there this year.
Well, I'm going to use a tire iron or something to make it a level playing field.
Nice. I figure since you two are bigger, I'll just let you two go at it first, and then I'll just take the winner. I'll just take the winner of that. That way, you guys get gassed a little bit to make it more even.
Yeah. Well, on the cardio side, you probably have an edge, so I think it should be reversed.
Nice. What else is going on, man? What's happening?
Man, just nose to the grindstone here at Exodus, just wrapping up that app project, getting ready to kick off the migration. So we're pretty excited about that. That is coming to a close. And right now we're just essentially working through like all the upload documents, like when you submit something to Google Play Console or the App Store, like there's so much back-end crap that people don't really realize. A lot of the paperwork or admin documents and like the email flows. So just wrapping up some back end stuff and man, just excited to be done with it. When we went down this route, well, it's been 15 months now. 15 months ago, we were excited. Like we're in Figma, like design the UI and like going through and testing stuff. And it was like, now it's at the point where you just want it to be done, and let the general public see it, let the general public use it, and let them tell us how good of a job we did in reality. Because it doesn't matter what I think, doesn't matter what Cameron thinks, doesn't matter what Jake thinks. Like it matters what the general public thinks. So we're just excited to get it out and move on to the next thing.
Nice, man. Yeah. So, and for people who maybe aren't as in the know, like I know what you're talking about, right? But like when you say the app project and stuff like that, if like I don't want you to let too much of the cat out of the bag because this probably won't drop until I think Jake makes some announcements or whatever. But just general terms, like what could people expect?
Yeah, sorry, we talk so much. Like sometimes I forget we're recording a podcast that whatever 20, 30. This is
literally like Chad and Clint like life discussion, like the first part about like beat up ears and kicking each other's ass, and then transitioning to like building an app. That's exactly how like our personal conversations go.
So I don't know. It was probably 2 years ago, and I guess let me back up. 2018, when we launched our very first connected device, very first cell camera, we partnered with a software company called Scout Tech, who ran a third-party app. And at the time, it made sense for the solution that they were providing for us and the solution that we were providing for them. But the IoT side in the trail camera space has changed, just like it is night and day compared to what it was 6 years ago. And over the course of having cellular cameras on that software, we just consistently gathered feedback from end users or consumers, our customers, and passed that along to the software company. And there were just so many changes that needed to be taken place over the course of 5 years that never took place. We were just like, we kind of drew a line in the sand and said, hey, like these are the options. We're just going to go do this by ourselves. And ultimately that's what we did. So the app project that I'm speaking of is the mobile application to run our cellular trail cameras. So all of the existing Exodus cellular trail cameras that we've sold since 2018 can now be migrated over to a new, better, more cost-effective, better user experience mobile application. And then obviously moving forward, any cameras sold from this date forth will be applicable to use on that application as well.
Right. Yeah. And I don't, I know Jake's going to, you guys are going to drop a bunch of stuff, a bunch of intel around like all the benefits and, all the reasons to believe and, things of that nature. Right. So we don't need to get into like the specifics necessarily, but I think the important things you mentioned, right, is just, people's ears perk up when you say cost effective, right? It's like, cause it's just, to be honest, it's like, especially if you're running like a handful of them, right? Data plans, line extensions and stuff like that. It does, it does add up. And then throw in the cost of batteries and you're looking at some coin, you know what I mean? So anywhere people can save. So that's awesome. And then the user experience too, which is always nice to be able to like easily navigate, add cameras, remove cameras, turn them on, turn them off, activate them, deactivate them. Cause I'll be honest, like I've had a handful of them for several years now. Right. and I would usually never deactivate them because I deactivated one once, like using Scout Tech, and I played hell trying to get that camera back on, like afterwards. And so like after that, for like 3 years, I've never deactivated a camera. I just let them run. And I'm like, it was
Yeah.
worth the $7 a month for that camera to just stay on or whatever it
Yeah.
was. You know what I mean? To like keep it on to not have to go through that again.
Well, one of the big things that also, and we won't go down any more of these wormholes, but just on the, for us being able to produce content in-house, like the amount of tutorial and written resources that we have for people to use and know how to navigate, know what buttons do what, know, icon locations and the different things. Like we have videos for all of that. So instead of, if someone hits that problem, like, hey, I'm not sure what to do here on the deactivation, registration, whatever it is, like we have a video for it. I can we walk you through it, where
Right.
that portion of the user experience was missing with the previous software.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it wasn't terribly intuitive necessarily, but like, man, like you being a hunter, dude, it's like whenever you're wanting something to work, you just want it to work.
That's right.
You don't want to have to think about, hey, thumbs up. Got the little thumbs up emoji going on. But yeah, that's kind of like the net. It's like you want to be able to just kind of snap your fingers and do what you need it to do, because you're usually spending time trying to get into the timber, shoot your bow, spend time with family, get work done, like whatever the case is, right? Everyone's time's valuable. I think that's one of the cool things you guys always kind of have done or have always thought of, was not just like, the end consumer, right? Because a lot of companies will say that, right? But the fact that you guys have really kind of taken to heart since your inception, that you were trying to make things as, I don't want to say as easy, but as user friendly for the hunter buying your product, because you were in that position at one point, struggling with the same things, right? Of like inefficient things breaking, whatever the case was, right? And so that's always been, Exodus's focus and your personal mantra, the flag that you personally carry, and I just always thought that was super cool, that that was always the focus and the intent.
Man, if people don't buy your stuff, you don't have a business. So it's like, and and there's an argument there. Like if you're selling to boxery stores, like the end user doesn't matter. And I think that's where obviously part of that disconnect came from. But we look at it as on the app side, the cellular device side, we're selling you time. That's what you're buying really. And, people don't look at it that way. But also like when people give us our dollars, like I know from a small business owner perspective that those folks are giving me their time out of their day. Like if they're working a job making whatever, $50 an hour or $20 an hour or whatever it is, like there's so many hours out of their life are coming to me for a product. Like that weighs heavy on me, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think enough people think about it that way.
Yeah.
If they did, maybe you would have a lot more Exodus type of, companies out there. But, I think people just lose sight of where that dollar ultimately comes from,
No doubt.
and what it took to get it. But, obviously having you on, you're my boy. Number one, I always want to catch up with you. But number two, it's one of those things where, there's been a lot of discussion about trail cameras in general recently. It almost seems like, I think you and I joked about it at one point, like a year or so ago, where it was like, it's the off season whenever trail camera, like, the controversy of trail cameras pops up, right? Because it almost feels like, good Lord, man, you guys got nothing better to do than figure out like how to create, or stir controversy. And to be fair, it's oftentimes not the hunter per se. It's oftentimes an agency or whatever the case is. It's, looking at their laws, regulations. And I guess it shouldn't be surprising, because that time of year is whenever everyone's kind of going through, most states at least are going through, looking at their game laws and stuff for the upcoming year. They're setting bag limits and doing all that stuff, getting ready for license sales and stuff like that. So I guess it shouldn't be shocking to me that comes up. But, just in general, right? Because there's been a couple different states, right? Like, because Kansas did it last year, right? If I'm not mistaken, right? They banned some cameras right on public lands. And then Kentucky did it recently, right? Was one.
No, Kentucky has talked about it, but
has talked about it. Okay.
Yeah, they've they've opened discussions on
All right.
on the topic.
All right, open discussions. And in Iowa, that came up recently, and then what I have seen is that they've kind of tabled it for now, like, and they're going to kind of address it for next year more holistically or whatever.
That's correct.
But like, I'm just curious if you have any sense of like, because you're a lot closer to this stuff than I am, for obvious reasons. But if you have any sense about where, like, what problem are the different states trying to solve that it keeps kind of, it seems, and it might be that we're overly sensitive to it because of, what we do, like the business that you have, this, and I have a podcast, and you're of course one of my best friends. And so I'm somewhat tuned into that stuff because I like to stay close to the stuff my buddies are working on and stuff, but I've never got a sense of like what problem they're trying to solve and how removing trail cameras from said types of property addresses it. You know what I mean? And it just seems like I don't see like a lot of inroads necessarily, or it's one thing if someone says we have a clear problem and we have a clear solution, right? And then you can debate that or not, right? And that's fine. And you don't have to necessarily like the outcome, but at least there's clarity around where it's coming from and what you're really trying to address. And, and there's multiple solutions, and you kind of pick the best one, and democracy wins out, right? And one gets selected and you move on. But I've never been able to get a clear sense of like, what are we trying to address? And how is it that trail cameras always seem to be like, removing them seems to be the solution?
Clint, I've been asking myself the same damn questions for the last 3 freaking years, man. The comments or statements that we see from state officials, whether you're talking Kansas, Iowa, conversations that are happening in Kansas, in Ohio, in Illinois, Wisconsin. I mean, these conversations are taking place everywhere, and it always boils back to overcrowded land because of access issues. That's what a lot of this is, boils down to. And the question that we ask ourselves is, how is that? How is it? Why is it trail camera related? And like, how does removing trail cameras from that equation solve that problem? And in Kansas, it was, in regards to public land or WMAs, or I'm sorry, WEHAs.
WEHAs, yeah.
The walk-in hunter access program there, that there was overcrowding of public land and in conjunction with that, people felt like when they saw a camera, they could not hunt there. Like it was spot claiming. But you're looking at it, which does not make sense to me. It's an inanimate object on a tree. How is that different than a tree stand, ground blind, whatever the case is? But the general consensus or thesis is it's overcrowding of public ground relating to limiting residents and non-residents from opportunities due to access. And there's a whole lot more, I don't want to say variables. There's a lot bigger input factors that are going into limited opportunities and access problems than freaking trail cameers. Like, well, man, it just doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to some of the officials that we have talked to. It's just, and the reality of it is, we are so bad as an industry. We are so bad about using policy and lobbyists to fight for, stand up for us and fight for what we want, fight for change, fight for, redacts or whatever the case is. Like, we don't use it. And it's there for us to use. And until we get into the mindset of fighting it in that way, we are going to consistently lose. And that's just not with trail cameras. That's with, if you look on the Western Front, man, the Western Front, whether you're talking Washington, Oregon, Colorado, like they set the precedent of what happens through the Midwest, all the way through the country. Like the stuff is happening out there first, and then it trickles down to whitetails, because these Western states are managing, I'm going to say resource, but their wild game resource, their numbers, they have to be managed in a more strict, regimented way because there are less of them, right? And on the landscape. When you look at whitetails, like they're everywhere, right? I mean, the whitetail population is abundant in most states, and because of that resource is there, like we don't look at it like it's ever going to go away. But if we continue down this path, like my kids, maybe not my kids' time. Well, yeah, probably will be my kids' time. Like hunting, like as we know it today, it will not exist. And people are so blind to this for whatever reason, like they can't wrap their head around it, but it is freaking coming.
Yeah.
And like, that's the bigger problem we need to be more aware of.
Well, yeah, because I mean, it's always, so this is the thing. This is the way I kind of look at it. Like, there's always at the beginning, there's a canary in the mine shaft, right? It's almost testing, right? Of how much of a fight is there? You know, how many feathers are we going to ruffle? What can we remove, or whatever the case is? Like, I always operate under the idea that regardless of what it is, like they never give more rights back to you. They, like, anything that's ever been taken away never is given back.
You're not getting
right?
it back.
Right. Like, 1776, there was or I guess I'll say during the Revolutionary War, right? We were fighting over like a 2% sales or 2% tax, right? We're taxed at 40% now, right? Roughly, right? Like, so we literally went to war over 2%, and here we are sitting at 40, and everyone's like, yeah, cool, man. I got air conditioning. I got a house. Like, that's it. And so you get comfortable with giving things away because you think you're buying some form of security or whatever. But it just seems odd to me, so going back, like, to me, trail cameras is a canary in a mine shaft. Like, if I'm a bow company or I'm in any other company or anything in the hunting space, like, that to me is a red flag, because it doesn't stop there, right? It's like, because as you weaken things, then other interest groups get involved whenever they smell blood in the water, and now you're less powerful and able to be, manipulated more easily, right? And so then they start coming for other things like bag limits that they don't have any, or management of wildlife, which they shouldn't have any say in, right? And things of that nature. They start to influence those types of things, right? The one
that's
thing
what's happening. That's what's happening on the Western Front. Like, if anybody's not aware of like the ballot box initiatives in the wildlife management through public voting, like that's what's happening in Colorado. That's what's happening in the state of Washington. And I'm not the person to talk on that specific topic, because then you get into reading federal legislation, the Lacey Act, and all the different laws that kind of set the stage for different state entities to manage the resource, right? But the one guy who does do an outstanding job is Randy Newberg.
Yeah.
He spends his own dollars hiring legal teams to coach him up on, hey, why are we managing wildlife as commerce, which is a federal violation? Yet here we are on this field, on this stage where these states are managing wildlife as commerce. Like,
yeah,
where do you draw a line?
Yeah, it's like if the right people don't know, they can get away with almost anything, right? That's kind of what. But going back to, like, thinking of whitetails here and kind of mentioning, back to the topic of the trail camera debate, when you mentioned, like, a lot of it's coming from access issues, right? Like, I agree with you. I have a hard time understanding, like, how trail cameras create an access issue, right? And, like, I understand whenever you say, like, spot claiming or whatever the case is, just seems a little weird to me. Like, I don't know, we've hunted Kansas quite a bit together, right? I don't necessarily recall ever seeing more than 3 or 4 trail cameras over the course of 3 seasons. And they weren't even in great spots. They weren't even in spots like I would consider hunting, right? So that's like that's number one, which seems kind of weird. But 2, like, the bigger issue. Well, let me back up for a second. If that's the case, then I want to see Pennsylvania ban flagging tape, because that shit's everywhere. You know what I mean? Like, for real. You know what I mean? Like, if we're going to talk about spot claiming, like, I go into a place around me locally, dude, and it's like, you can't walk into a piece of timber around here without there being, like, a line of flagging tape to, like, someone's tree that they're going to hunt, or, like, where they're going to put their ground blind, or whatever the case is, right? So, like, if we're going to, and I'm not saying Pennsylvania needs to go down the route of doing that stuff. It's like, it is what it is. I don't see that as a deterrent for me. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, cool. Someone had walked through here, big deal. But the bigger thing for me when we start talking about access, we'll just keep like use Kansas as the example, just because you and I have like knowledge of being there and we've been there, several years and so forth. But when I look at I know when you and I were talking, because you and I we're not hunting there this year, like we're going to a different state together this year. But I've had multiple friends guys that we know mutually that have reached out because they're going this year, and they were just like, hey, I'm not asking for spots or anything like that, but just like, hey, what was your experience? What should I look at? What should I look for? The same questions you and I had before you and I went out, right?
Yeah.
And the one thing I kind of told them was like, man, I'm looking at the map and I'm like, a lot of the places that Chad and I had marked that we had either hunted, scouted, or whatever the case were, that was weehaw. I was like, man, I would venture to say that probably like at least 40% of that doesn't exist anymore. Like that stuff that was huntable just 3 years ago is no longer huntable. Right. And so whether that's like, and I'm not saying like the big bad outfitter guys, it's not what the point of this is. Everyone has like a role to play, but it's just like a fact. It's just a reality, right? It's like whether or not they're not getting re-enrolled in the program, or whether someone has leased that property, right? Or whether a hunting outfitter has leased like a bunch of farms that are around there. Like there's a group that's in multiple states because they've emailed me in the past and asked me to join like their lease group. And if you do that, they basically have tens of thousands of acres of farmland in different units, and one of them being in Kansas, one of them being in Iowa, one of them being like have multiple states, and you pay a fee to get in, and you basically have access to all these farms essentially, right? And so it's groups like that going out, continue to try to acquire more, because that fee to join that group was like, I forget what it was. I think it was like $3,000 or something like that to join the group, and you have access to all these farms, and you can select you have to kind of select weeks or whatever, right? I mean, it's not my cup of tea. I've known people who have done it. But I mean, you're losing access to those types of things, right? And so it's like the time would be better spent, either, putting boots on the ground and trying to enroll people into those programs to get more access, right? Or do something to where, some, tax incentives or whatever the case is to keep land like out of lease or whatever the case is. Like, I don't know, any number of things, right? To keep it open to the public or have it as an option for the public to hunt. Solving a land issue with a non-land product by removing a non-land product makes no sense to me. Like it doesn't, like the two don't match up. I can't understand how adults would have a conversation about that and think that those two things like equal each other in some way.
Well, I think there's a handful of things there, right? As a community, we have me problems, right? And no one's talking about the bigger picture. And that is part of how we are at the place that we're at, right? Like my neighbor shot the buck that I was hunting because we could bait, and he had a corn pile, and he shot him with a crossbow, and he had a cell camera there. It's a me problem. My spot, I walked 3 miles back on this piece of public through the swamp to get to my bedding spot that I want to hunt, and there's a cell camera. Now I can't hunt there. It's a me problem. So when you look at that, that's a big portion of it. Like we do not have long-term vision of where this is going because we have me problems. The other thing that ties into that by nature is capitalism and the exploitation of the resource. And I don't want anyone, like I'm guilty of that. You're guilty of that. Anyone who monetizes anything off of what we call the hunting community is helping to exploit that resource in some capacity. It may not be your intent. That may not be your sole desire to like run this thing down the tubes, but it is what it is. And like, we're all, I don't want to I guess I'm a little bit of a hypocrite here, but I'm stating the fact that exploitation of the resource is part of our problem, because going back to land, now you have a landowner who could enroll ground, and we'll stick with Kansas on this. You can enroll ground in a walk-in hunting access program and get paid peanuts and get some tax breaks, or you could lease it to an outfitter for $30 an acre, $40 an acre. I've seen $50 an acre. Like it's all, and who's to blame a struggling farmer? I say struggling. He's probably doing all right, but who's to blame the landowner? Like it's his ground. He owns it. He has the right to do whatever the hell he wants to do with it. But again, losing that access becomes a me problem. Like, oh, we lost all the weehaw. Well,
Right.
I mean, yeah, that's part of it. So it's like, when we get into these conversations, they need to be had by people who are far more intelligent than me and far more in tuned with what is going on, because it is a tangled net. It's a tangled web that's very intricate with, a bunch of different factors.
Yeah. It's it's a tangled web, and it's one of those things where, you know, the unintended consequence of, there being a lot of information about hunting, in general. Because I've heard people say, different YouTube channel creators that are spot burning and stuff like that have been accused of spot burning. Like, I know some of those guys. Some of those guys I don't know well, but I've talked to or whatever. Like, I don't know that I've met any of them that would intentionally spot burn. Like, could someone have seen something in a video or something like that like, where you start to put two and two together, right? Like, and they didn't think of that as a mark, like as a landmark or whatever, right? Sure, that stuff happens. You create enough content, things like that are going to happen. But the unintended consequence, of there being a lot of hunting content and us getting to be able to consume the things that we're passionate about. We have a hobby where, a hobby that we're passionate about, is that, it does become a commerce, right? Like, that's kind of the unintended consequence, right? And then there's a dollar amount that's associated with this thing over here, right? And I don't know how, and then you create the tangled web that you kind of talked about, right? Because now there's like a whole lot of kind of facets that go into it, like from like the legal side of things, obviously like the laws and things like that are part of it. How do you adjudicate those things, right? Like, how do you make sense of them and how you implement things, create new laws? What role does the hunting, like, media community have? Like, responsibility do they have? And like, what should their, I don't want to say retribution be, but like, what should they be required to do or provide or whatever the case is, knowing that they are creating some of this like halo effect, right? Like, there's a whole, and the weird thing is like, you get to a certain point, like I think kind of like where we're at now, is that, man, strings that are being pulled in areas outside of hunting now impacted. You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense? Like, there's this like economist guy that I listen to that's wicked smart, and he looks at economies from the scale of like resources and food and like famine and like weather and like all this stuff, right? Because he's like, it's so interconnected that you pull like a resource string in Abu Dhabi, right? He was like, it's so connected now that like there's something moves in Ohio, United of the US, right? He's like, it's that kind of like intertwined now, right? And it feels like hunting's kind of moving that way, to where it's like, we used to feel, for better or for worse, a little bit isolated. Like we were sitting on this little island all on our own that no one really paid attention to, right? And shit, we didn't even pay attention to each other.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Because there was no social media, there was no YouTube channels, there were no podcasts and stuff like that. And now it's gone beyond that, to where now it's like, well, no, we're not mainstream, but we have access to those mainstream things. And like, and everyone who's in the community can be as connected as they want to be, right? And maybe hyper connected in some cases, right? And so now things that are occurring in mainstream world, because we all live in the mainstream as well as hunting, right? That's kind of the odd part of it. Like, hunting is like a piece of this, but we all live in the mainstream. And those things, influences and perspectives are making their way into hunting, and on a more regular basis, and I think in a more substantial way as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, the intertangled webs that we have here, going back to the topic around commerce. Commerce is also what is supporting large conservation efforts at the same time. Like, the Pittman-Robertson Act is in place for a reason.
Yeah.
So we have this, we have this North American conservation model that is proven to work. Like, it's one of a kind in the entire world. It is by far the best system. But you fast forward into the connected world where like everything, like as you said, every action has a reaction or multiple reactions. I just don't think it was ever intended to be this kind of complex or intertwined with some of the issues that we have. And some of it is related to the transfer of information and the speed of, I guess, the speed that we have now to transfer information. Like everyone learns faster. Everything happens at a much faster rate because of the interwebs, the internet, or whatever you want to call it. It's just, again, it's I understand what's going on, but to critically think about the problem and the causes of that problem and the possible solutions, it is so far over my head. I can talk about it, but I don't have a remedy for anything.
Yeah. I mean, it's well above my pay grade. I don't have the brain to dissect all of that. I mean, I can see it well enough to go and see how things are somewhat connected, right? But I'm same boat as you, where it's like I don't have a solution. Like my solution a lot of times is like blow it all up.
Well, I would say the one thing that we can do, and I'm regurgitating some of this from Skip Sly, who was on our podcast a little while ago, is take yourself out of the equation and stop thinking about what is best for Chad Sylvester or Clint Campbell, and think about what is best for the resource in that state. And then when you get past that level, what is best for the residents of that state? And then as non-residents, we should come third. And that's the reality of it. And I think if people start looking and having that perspective, I think slowly we can start to make some progress. But talking about it helps. Like as our AA meetings say, like talking and admitting we have a problem is the first step of having a problem or something. I don't know. Never been to an AA meeting, but I've heard that's what they say.
I got my coin right here. I'm just kidding. Oh man. Yeah, it's so hard to do. Like human nature is to not remove yourself from things. We actively place ourselves in the middle of things that we really don't have a role in, being in the middle of,
And the other thing is too, and this is kind of where I sit, is I don't have a whole lot of faith in policy and the officials who write the policy. Like that's how we got to the place that we're at in the world. And like everybody complains about it, and I don't need to go into politics, but the question I ask myself is, what are you doing about it? Like if I'm going to bitch about something, complain about something, I'll look at myself in the mirror and say, well, what am I doing about it? And if I'm not doing anything about it, my lips should be zipped.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, and to be quite honest with you, like the extent of me doing something about it is just having this conversation, to be quite honest, right? And trying to get someone's perspective who knows a little bit more than me. I started watching some just like videos of the topic just to try to like understand a little bit. Was reading a little bit about how some of the licensing things have changed and stuff like that to get a perspective. One of the guys who always has a really good perspective on it that I like to talk to, he and I have never talked about it on a podcast, a little bit I think, but we've talked about it offline, is Tony Peterson. Like he's been kind of trumpeting this like for a while now, like people, like you better get a clue because the reckoning is coming, like whether you want to believe it or not. And I mean, he was saying it several years ago, there were things that he was kind of not warning me of, but just like, hey man, there's some things that's going to happen out West. Like, this is especially specific to like non-resident. And it was around the time when the kerfluffle kind of like in Montana happened, with like, I think it was like with ranchers or, property owners, et cetera, et cetera. And he was very quick to kind of like, just as a heads up, like when we were talking about it, just like, this is just like the first of many, like it's coming. Right. And I think as whitetail hunters, we always kind of thought, to your point, it's like the resource is so abundant, right? And that, they're doing this stuff out there because they've got limited resources, and, who doesn't want to take a trip to Montana or Wyoming or wherever to elk hunt, right? Like they're getting run over by, a bunch of non-residents that don't know what the hell they're doing. Like, and I think the the false sense of security that we had was that, but it will never really happen in whitetails, right? Because it's like, I mean, they're everywhere. And now you start to look at different states that are either increasing prices significantly or changing like the way things are being drawn, or like the lottery system, or even like look at Idaho, like changing like their system, right? Like for elk tags, right? Like that used to be quote unquote over the counter, right? You could get tags as long as you got in line at the right time or whatever. When like a lottery system is first come first serve, really, right? And now that's all changed. And then Nebraska was always like a good place you could go and be easy to get to, and that's not the case anymore. Kansas increased their license price to where now you have to purchase the license in order to get to put in for the draw. And if you don't draw, then you get your point, but you're out. I think you're out the money on the license, and so making it more expensive for non-residents and harder to get, and just point creep in general. Right. And so all the things that he kind of saw coming, that I think a lot of people thought, well, this won't happen as much in whitetails. I think it's on our doorstep. You know what I mean? I think like where it starts with is with some of that license increases, additional pressure on non-residents, and then talking about access and finding scapegoats for access problems and things like that. Because I think the thing is that they're trying to figure out, I think there are some bad actors for sure. I think there are some people who are honestly trying to figure out how do we solve this? We have an access issue. We have a resource. We don't want people to not come hunt whatever state this is. So how do we make it work? Right. It's like, and I think they're pointing their pitchforks in one direction. Right. And then the other direction might be like, well, we're going to increase prices and reduce the number of they never reduce the number of tags very often, honestly. I think Iowa does, if I'm not mistaken. I've seen their tag, non-resident tags kind of fluctuate and stuff like that. But I don't know that I've ever seen Kansas fluctuate necessarily. And I might be misspeaking here. But I was reading today that's I want to say, I think it was maybe the past 2 years, or maybe it was even the past 3. I don't remember exactly what the dates were. But it was the first time the past several years that they've actually sold out of every tag, that there were no tags remaining for any unit, right? And they would always usually have, from what I had seen, was there would usually be across the state, across all the different units, there would usually be somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 tags that were unspoken for, roughly, right? And that's a lot of additional pressure on a resource consistently, right? And they have to figure out how to manage that, and and with access dwindling, right? We're not as much WeHob being open for people to hunt. It's yeah, I mean, it causes a problem for sure.
Yeah,
I shouldn't say a problem. It causes some challenges, right? You have to kind of think about things and figure out how do you.
Well, no, I think it's fair to say that it's a problem, right? I think that's a fair assessment. But going back to what their solution to it is it's not very thoughtful, right?
Yeah,
I think it's, from a common sense approach, you can look at it and say, okay, how is that solving the problem? But I think it plays into the bigger picture, where we can look at these things that are very polarizing in hunting, much like the political landscape among society, right? We could talk about things like baiting, we could talk things about cell cameras, and we could talk about crossbows. Those are 3 very polarizing things that people butt heads on, regardless of where you live and what your state regulation is around those 3 topics. I mean, you could talk to guys in Illinois where you can't bait, yet they're for baiting. And then you have guys that in Ohio, where it's legal to bait, they can't stand baiting. So regardless of where you live and how you hunt, everybody is butting heads on these topics. And those are the things where it's easiest to cause disruption among the community. And those are the things that will be taken away.
It's low hanging fruit, right?
Yeah.
That's
1,000%.
Yeah.
But it goes into, again, the bigger picture. It's okay, let's take crossbows away next. I don't hunt with crossbow. I'm not for crossbows. I'm not anti-crossbow. But the concession there is, well, let's just give them a season, right? Like, let's just carve out a couple weeks. We'll give them a season. Why aren't they doing that for compounds? Is compounds going to be next?
Mm-hmm.
Like when,
yeah.
So you can just keep going down this waterfall tier of, when they start taking things away, it's generally not a good trend because it won't stop with cell cameras.
Yeah. And that's a good kind of segue because I wanted to, because that one thing I was kind of, it seems like, so at first it seemed like it was trail cameras on public land, like on certain parts of public for certain states. Right. And then it kind of morphed from that to, well, now it's cell cameras, right? That's an issue. Right. And so do you feel like, because and I don't want to say, we'll use Iowa as a good example for this, right? Because Iowa, and we said earlier, they kind of said, hey, we're going to pump the brakes and we're going to take a look at this and we'll figure out what we're going to do with cameras on public land, next year for 2025, I guess, right? That would be the year, right? The 25 season. And, which is great. They said timeout, right? And we'll see what happens. But do you think that cell cameras kind of are used as a scapegoat or a way to kind of ratchet it up, right? Because I feel like at first it was okay, cameras on public land. And then the way to kind of and I feel like this, especially this Iowa one, I feel like there was a lot of people that pushed back really, really quick on it because it was hey, wait a minute. We're just talking cameras here, and it's not like Iowa's overrun with people and they're really strict on non-resident hunting and stuff like that. Right. And so I felt like just from watching it happen, I felt like, man, there was a real quick pushback. People were because I feel like people thought, man, if Iowa can do this, which is the hunting, whitetail hunting mecca, then this could happen anywhere. Right. And I felt like everyone kind of jumped, but do you feel like if it would have been more so addressing cell cameras, that if it would have been kind of promoted as that, right? That we're really just trying to address cell cameras, but we don't want to just call out one. So we're just going to blanket everything, right? That it would have gotten more traction because that's the boogeyman, right? And I feel like when they want to get some movement, they go after the thing that people are kind of divided on, right? It'd be like talking to people about mechanical broadheads, versus fixed blades, right? You want to create a rift, just bring those two things up, right? Yeah. You're not going to create a rift so much of using just trail cameras, right? Because a lot of people use those, right? But there's definitely groups who are pro cell and there's definitely groups who are anti cell, right?
Yeah.
And so that becomes the weakening kind of part of it that someone could press against to kind of move their agenda forward. So do you feel like cell cameras are often used as a scapegoat to kind of move agendas forward?
Yes, somewhat. And I think it happens for a couple different reasons. And to go back on the Iowa thing, that's always been their law.
Yeah. 100%.
So the stance was a clarification of the existing regulations, and then that was redacted or tabled for further input. But going back to do I think, they should have tagged that as cell cameras only versus trail cameras in general, because cell cameras are more polarizing. I think it ties into somewhat the fair chase policies, which are kind of promoted by Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett. And I did a video on this probably 4 years ago. No, probably 5 years ago, maybe.
Look at you, way ahead of your time.
Maybe
man.
6 years ago.
Trends.
Yeah, and in that video, I remember saying there were several states, and I think I probably mentioned Iowa and Kansas, where it's black, it's gray. It's not black and white. It's classified as if electronic devices are used to transmit information about in the whereabouts of game, it is a fair chase violation, right? Mm-hmm. So that includes two-way radios. And some of this stuff is spelled out in some of these bylaws, two-way radios, because the bylaw was written in 1970 where people used two-way radios. It doesn't say I can't text Clint Campbell from my cell phone while we're, hunting the same block of timber in Kansas. Like, how many people do that?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody does it. Hey, just
Yeah,
saw a good
you
one.
ever watching a
He's headed
whitetail
north.
adrenaline video?
Yeah, it's like,
You know,
so
not to call those guys out, but
some of the regulations and bylaws do need updated to today's standards because we don't live the same way we lived in 1970 and 1980 and not even 1990. Okay.
Mhm.
So some of the stuff does need updated. Again, I think that we're in a place where technology makes big deer more accessible, even though opportunity is limited. For instance, and I'll give an example for that. A guy that has 30 cell cameras, like myself, I can now scatter those out across every piece of public in the county that I live in to find the two biggest deer that I want to kill, or not kill, the two biggest deer I want to pursue. That offends people. Yet, for the last 20 years, 25 years, 25-ish years, we've been preaching QDM, right? Stop shooting 2-year-olds. Stop shooting 1.5-year-old bucks. Let them get the 3. Let them get the 4. Shoot them when they're mature. Like, we all want to kill big deer. That's the narrative we've all been pushing for the last 25 years. Last year, we're at a place where the annual harvest numbers, I don't know. You could look at the NDA annual harvest report. It has these statistics in there. Don't know what they are off the top of my head, but we're at a place where more people are killing more mature, bigger deer, and everybody's pissed off because it's not them. And that's the reality of it. So what do we want? Do we want to kill big 4, 5, 6-year-old bucks? Or do we want to go back and kill 1 and 2-year-olds and not have any mature bucks to hunt at all? It's like somewhere we have to make our mind up here.
Yeah, it's
So I think it's all of that leading to cell cameras being more polarizing and that thing being, kind of splitting the hunting community, or one of the things that splits the hunting community. And that's what's the low hanging fruit there.
Yeah. It's weird to me though, because the hunting, like the fair chase aspect of cell cameras is like doesn't add up for me necessarily, right? Because especially for like the public land kind of component thing, right? Because I don't know anybody who has cell cameras on public land that could actually use their cell camera to go kill a deer like the same day. You know what I mean? Just by the nature of unless the public is literally out your back door and you border it, I don't know how you do that. That's like the part that always kind of boggles the mind for me a little bit, because to me, the fair chase piece of it is more so and they have every right to use it. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but is more so the private piece. Because I know for sure it's if I hung cameras on my dad's 60 acres that he has and I lived there, right? Or just the old man lives there, right? And I hung some cell cameras for him. I know where the deer like to travel. I know a travel route when they're here. I kind of know where they're headed. Know how they want to get to the one food plot he has and stuff like that, right? So if I just hung a camera in a pinch that was close by there, right, and know how they'd like to enter the field and all that kind of stuff, right? He feasibly could see it be taken and he could get to that spot, because he has the way his property set up is he could go to where he'd never get winded and never have to cross the trail and whatever, he could get into a spot and be ready to kill the deer, right? That's a public land kind of, not issue, but an example, right? I don't really know anybody that has that capability to do on I'm sorry, that was a private land example. I don't know anybody who really has the capability to do that on public. Not saying it's not possible, right? But the instances of the fair chase thing being violated, I feel would happen far more often in a private land setting than it would in a public land setting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the opportunity is there, right? But the examples that are generally used to demonstrate the narrative are always the extremes. It's always that case. When you get into an argument, you're kind of pleading your side or pleading the case, you use the two extremes. And that is kind of what is being pushed is, well, Joe Blow down the street can have a cell camera out his back door, get a picture of and it's always a big deer, Boone and Crockett deer, and he shoots him off his back porch. Could it happen? Is the opportunity there for that to happen? Sure. I'm not going to say that it's not, but how often does that happen? I would almost bet, I had almost bet my life that there's more deer being killed from text messages being sent than cell camera pictures.
I'll one up you and say that I would lay an amount of money on the fact that there are more big deer killed from map apps than there is from anything else.
Yeah.
Right. To me, that is the thing that unlocked a lot of the opportunity. Right. To me, that is the thing that has pressured the access. Right. Yep. And has created putting more people on top of more people. Right. Like, and it's funny to know, and I'm not saying like, look, I use it. Right. Like, be the first one to admit. Right. Now, I hunted before there was any map apps. Right. And got lost, plenty, and got lost plenty. But, so it wouldn't change like whether or not I would go hunting or not. Right. But you want to talk about something that has put more people in the woods and in deeper places and things like that 100% has done it. Has done far more for that than anything else. And I'm not saying people shouldn't be. Look, man, it's like, I hope people go out and enjoy the great outdoors. I hope people get out into the woods and scout and hunt and spend time there and get lost there and find themselves and have hard hunts and do all that stuff, right? Like, but let's just be honest about where the pressure comes from, right? It's like they wouldn't be hanging those cameras in those spots if they couldn't find them.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm just, it's like, it's just call it what it is, right? And so, if we're not going to take a look at everything and kind of understand, what the impact is, and I'm not saying that we should be removing any of these things necessarily. I think that, there are certain things that you have to make available to keep people in the woods, right? Because that's the other part of it too, right? You want to keep people engaged. That way there's people to fight for the resource and stuff like that. And so you have to kind of balance these things, right? And so you have to let some of the technology and stuff be able to be applied, because that's what keeps some people engaged, right? Like, if they just removed cameras in general, right? Like, you would see some people just not hunt. Like that, I think that's true, because there are some people just hunt by their cameras and that's it, right? And they don't know how to otherwise, right? I think if you all of a sudden banned map apps, I think you would see a max exodus of, no pun intended, from the hunting space, right? Because I don't know how many people that are maybe newer hunters that are that comfortable walking more than a quarter mile, half mile into the woods. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's it, and so I think that would be to a detriment. So I think there has to be like a two-part solution to this, right? Not that you and I are going to solve this today, but I think that it is like what technology is helping us, right? And keeping people engaged and doing good things for the deer herd, right? Because I could argue like trail camera. I made this, I said this to Jake whenever I was on you guys' show after I got back from Kansas, because we were talking a little bit about the cell camera stuff out there. And I was like, or the camera stuff out there on public. And I was like, I think what's the unintended consequence is going to be that a lot of out-of-state people are going to end up shooting more 120, 125 inch deer in Kansas that are from Florida because they've never seen a deer over 100 inches in their life before, versus knowing that there's a 150 inch deer or 250 inch deer in that block of timber that they could hunt. Right. I was like, so I think the unintended consequences is they're going to start shooting younger deer because you just don't know. And if you're on a 5-day hunt and you got a $700 tag in your pocket, like you and you're from Florida and you're shooting greyhounds, you know what I mean? Like that first 2-year-old whitetail in Kansas is going to look a hell of a lot bigger than anything you've seen in Florida. You know what I mean? So, I mean, you're going to tag and good for that guy if that's what he wants to kill, but the unintended consequences is that guy may have passed that deer and hunted a more mature deer and it not be to the detriment of the age structure of the herd in those areas. Right now, are enough of the young ones going to get killed to be a detrimental impact? Like, I don't know. I'm not a biologist, right? But, it's feasible, right? It may not be likely, but it's possible. But yeah, it's a weird thing, man. So the 2-part solution is like what technology we're going to allow. Getting back to what I was going to say is that part of it. And then the other part of it is like, how are we maintaining and securing access for people to enjoy? Right.
I think that's the bigger problem. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like, and so I could see a world where it's like, there's a compromise of like, yeah, we have to have the technology discussion. Cause I think we're at a point in just like human evolution where like that has to be a discussion now. We've gotten to the point to where we did our first Neuralink implant, like however long ago, right? It's like, so technology is now part of like the ongoing human discussion, right? Like there's no separating the two. But then the other part of it for hunting is like, if we're really trying to deal with access issues or too many hunters in an area and stuff like that, we have to start taking a hard look at how do we maintain access or grow access or whatever the case is. And then at some point, the unpopular opinion, or the unpopular thing to say is like, at what point do we not focus on recruitment any longer? That the recruitment is now becoming a detriment to the hunting experience. Right. And I know that's unpopular, right? And like Matt Ranella gets killed over this. And I'm not saying that's the right solution, but like, if you have a lot of a resource and you can have a lot of people use it, if you have very few of a resource, then like you have to monitor like how many people are going to use it. I mean, it's just like, it's logic.
Yeah. The 3 R's, recruitment, retention, and whatever the third one was, I don't even know. That was another thing that was being pushed, I
think it was reintroduction. I think is what it was.
Okay. The last 20 years or so. And we're still on the decline, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, that's what people don't realize. Like, we're on a decline and so is access. So like, well, how does that happen? If every place is overcrowded and we're still losing hunters, then like, what are we doing?
How's that
obviously
work?
We're not doing anything, or we're not doing anything right. So again, bigger problems, bigger minds, bigger brains need to be thinking about this stuff than you and I. But ultimately, like in the next 5 to 10 years, the non-resident application process that we're used to as whitetail hunters it's not going to be like what it is today. It's going to be limited opportunities, similar to what the Western states are, regardless of how the actual resource is doing. Just from an access perspective, it's going to move in that direction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard to think that it wouldn't, right? Because if you just think about where we're at now versus where we were 5 years ago, as an example, right? And if, you're seeing states that used to just be over the counter, right? You could go to whenever that are implementing some form of restriction, and things of that nature. Just a matter of time until others do as well, right? Because what happens is that people will flock to those over the counter states, right? Like I could see a day, and I hate saying it because I like hunting it, but like I could certainly see a day that it happens in Missouri, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't draw a tag in Kansas. You can't draw a tag in Iowa, right? You can't get into Nebraska, like as an over the counter, right? So like, where's a great, good buck state to go hunt in the Midwest, right? Well, Missouri and Illinois, right? Maybe Indiana. It's a little bit of a sleeper, but I think it's becoming more popular, right? It's like, well, so when you see an influx in those places, like how long is it until they look at it and go, whoa, man, we got way too many people coming in, right? Like our herd's starting to take a hit, or hunter satisfaction is going down because the residents are mad because now, to your earlier point, my spot now has a trail camera in it, or my spot had a dude in it and it's never had a dude in it for 20 years.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden it becomes an issue, so I certainly think that's on the horizon.
Agreed.
Yeah. So when you think about the future of technology in hunting, like where do you think it goes, and what are the things that give you the most pause, or is there anything that you kind of see in the future, from a technology standpoint, it's going to be like a significant kind of tipping point, if you will?
In the near future, I don't see anything, but like talking, and this is going to sound really corny, but like my kids are 8 and 9. So like I have other kids over my house all the time,
mm-hmm.
between the ages of I'm going to say 6 and 11, right? And when they first know that I own a trail camera company, they think it's cool. Like, oh, you do this, you do that. I've seen you on YouTube, because we live in a rural community. A lot of the kids grow up in hunting families. But more than once, I've gotten this weird thing. It's like, why don't you just make a camera that shoots deer for you? So you could just hit a button and do it. And like and it seems like obviously that will never happen, right? Well, I say obviously.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, just don't be so absolute with that, man.
I don't know. I don't see anything on the horizon that's going to be a tipping point. I think that we're already there, and that's why we're having these types of conversations, because of the IoT space. Like, it is so connected. The Neuralink thing is really interesting. Like, I don't know if people follow AI and that, like, the revolution that's going on there and the speed of those tools that are just popping out every single day. Because of the creation of one tool, you can create 5 tools, and those 5 tools create 25 tools. So the growth there, or rate of growth, is so exponential. It's hard to fathom what is actually possible. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's that's it. When you say like a camera to kill deer, it's like, man, like, I know people will laugh at that, but you think about hog hunting, for example, right? Like, and how, like, killing hogs is like the Wild West, man. Like, you can kill them in any way you want to kill them, and it's just like, I could see a day where drones are killing hogs. You know what I mean? Especially for eradication in areas where they're not supposed to be and stuff like that. And so to think that, like, something like that, someone wouldn't explore that for another species or whatever. I mean, I think drones are getting hammered, like, pretty hard, right? I know there's a guy who's got, like, a case, I forget where he's from, I think it was for helping someone recover their deer. It might have even been Pennsylvania. I forget what state it was in. But, like, the drones can do some crazy things, man. Like, I met a guy when I was in Virginia, on a hunt over the winter, and he ran a drone, like, business, like a drone recovery business, right? And he said, like, all, season long, he's just crazy busy. Like, guy makes a bad shot on a good deer and wants to recover it, but doesn't want to pressure him. Like, he calls him up, and it's like, however much it is, $500 or whatever, and he flies in with, like, an infrared whatever and, like, a camera on the drone, and, like, can see it and be like, yep, your deer's there and he's alive, or your deer's there and he's dead, so you can go in and get him, or, like, whatever the case is, right? Like, there's some useful applications for some of that stuff, like things like that, and even that's, to a degree, like, that type of stuff I'm a little bit torn on, because to me I don't want the animal to go to waste, right? But I also think, like, the tracking in the part of it is part of, like, that human hunter experience that I think that the person should have to go find. You know what I mean? And so that's one that I'm kind of torn on. And to me, like, things like that are only going to continue to progress. Like, AI scouting tools, like, those are coming. You know what I mean? Like, that's not something that's far off. And to your point, the way AI is kind of proliferating, I sit on an AI committee at work, and, like, that's a lot of what we do, is talk about where AI is going, explore new tools and stuff like that. And the things that it can do, I don't think the average person understands quite, like, how potent it is.
No. Yeah. The drone thing has popped into my mind on more than one occasion, and I always squash it, because I go back and look at that as a tool, right? Like, this is the same argument that we have with firearms, right? Is it the tool, or is it the intent behind the end user? And my neighbor has a drone, and he started a little deer recovery, business. And you're shocked at how many videos I get, like, sent to me, like, through the summer or fall. He's just out flying the thing. Oh, there's a buck. Oh, there's a buck. And, like, in the wrong hands, number one, like, that is a violation of, I'm not sure what well, what am I trying to say? Wildlife harassment. I think users can be ticketed for that. But
Mm-hmm.
again, it's like, how do you prove their intent? Like I'm just
Right.
flying this to recover a deer, which is legal in most states. So the drone thing does pop into my mind, but it always goes back and is squashed for me personally based around me supporting firearms, because it's like, do you blame the tool or do you blame the user?
Right.
So it's like, again, the thing's not thinking for itself. You're flying it. So
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's I don't know.
Yeah. Some of
Let's
that
talk
stuff.
about something good.
Yeah, I know, right? This is a real downer. Yeah. I mean, with a lot of that stuff, I'm conflicted, because like my logical brain says like, hey, there's applications for this stuff that it can be helpful. You know
Right.
what I mean? I just don't have a lot of faith in humanity, that, they've just, I'm going to allow history to be my barometer, and,
Yeah.
and anything that can be used to be maniacal or to screw someone over or to do something inappropriate or with poor intent or whatever, it will be done,
Yeah.
which is why sometimes I err on the side of like, just don't even bother, right? Because it's going to end up, because I think, and then we'll talk about something happier here in a second, because I think what ends up happening is like, it's like anything else, right? Like the few bad actors taint the entire kind of barrel of apples. You know what I mean? And then those isolated incidences no longer become isolated, and they become precedent for, limiting other people's opportunities, or they're limiting what other people can use, or limiting the scope of other technologies, or whatever the case is, right? And so that's why for me, it's like you always have to kind of be mindful of like who you're letting into the hen house or what you're letting into the hen house, because it could turn into a fox, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you just have to be very mindful of that. Anyway, now we're going to transition to fun stuff for the next at least 5 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. So moving on to actual like hunting plans and getting excited for the season. My seat is broken and I keep getting shorter and shorter. I don't need to be any shorter whenever I'm hanging out with Chad. We already look like the movie Twins. With Danny DeVito and what's his name? I'm Danny DeVito in that scenario, unfortunately. But we're both getting ready for, I don't know if I would say I'm getting ready, but we're both going to do Western hunts this year. And so that's always kind of like a jump start to kind of preparation, right? Like, at least physically and things like that, and gear and stuff like that, right? Because it's a whole different ball of wax, right? You kind of have to change your mindset a little bit. Like, yeah, I like gear for whitetails, but to be honest with you, it's probably not as important as I make it out to be sometimes. But for hunting out west, like gear is life. You know what I mean? And so you kind of have to have, you have to have your shit dialed in. So what are you doing right now to kind of get ready for the beginning of the season, man? Because, that beginning of September, early September timeframe, dude, is just around the corner.
Yeah, I think we're like T-minus 65 days or something, maybe a little bit less. It is right around the corner. Man, I feel pretty damn good. I'm sitting here June 25th, 26th, 27th, whatever day it is, saying I feel pretty good where I'm at. I have been working out every day, strength training, cardiovascular training. I have been shooting my bow every single day. I don't need to make any new gear purchases and get acquainted with any new major pieces of gear this year, other than I am testing some new arrows. But I think that was a big thing for me the last couple of years. I have not shot well. And I say I've not shot well. I have not shot well for myself. I'm not a target archer. I'm not a competitive shooter, but I shoot pretty well as a hunter, right? In the last couple of years, I've struggled a little bit. New bow very late in the season. Last year, I was dicking around with a new sight that I wasn't super happy with. I'm still shooting it, which I'm more happy this year than I was last year. But just having the experience with that equipment for a couple seasons now, I think is, man, I feel like it's helped me, and it's probably just a confidence thing more than anything. But I really like where I'm at with my archery equipment. I have, in fact, this is the earliest. I'm getting ready to start shooting broadhead only from here on out, which is the earliest I've ever really been in that situation. And just this past week, once I get past the tuning portion or the tuning regiment of like getting everything tuned, I really don't shoot groups a whole lot. I'm more of a guy that, hey, I'm going to shoot 12 arrows today, but I'm shooting them individually in different scenarios to make each shot count as it were a hunting scenario. So I've gotten to that point. So I'm going to start shooting broadheads here in the next handful of days. I'm a little bit behind physically, but I'll get there.
Okay.
We've just been working a lot. I'll get there physically, but other than that, I'm just amped up, ready to go. I got bugle tube and a freaking handful of calls in my truck seat at all times, driving down the road, just practicing my calling. I probably look like a total idiot. My wife makes fun of me. But that's, I'm loving life, man.
Nice. That's awesome.
What about
man.
you? I mean, I think
the shooting the
this
bow
is your third
piece,
this
man.
is your third trip out west now, right? Third or fourth?
Yeah, this will be my third trip out west. Yeah. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's one of those things, like last year was a watershed year for me, and I feel like I didn't feel prepared at all for anything last year, and I had the best season I've ever had. So I'm embracing that, and this is like don't do shit preparation 2.0. Like, no, I'm just kidding. I've been shooting my longbow a lot, and unfortunately work's been really busy. So like and I was in Chicago for like a week for work, so I didn't get to shoot but like 2 days last week or whatever. It's just been really busy, so I haven't been shooting it every day necessarily, but I'm not using that when I go out west. But the point being is that the unintended consequence was in shooting, my longbow so consistently. It's like I've picked up the compound, I think a total of 3 times since I killed that deer in Kansas. I've only ever shot it 3 times since then. But when I pick it up, dude, I am like locked in, like shooting that thing better than I ever have. And I think it's just because, I would recommend anybody who likes to just shoot a bow, like even if you don't intend to shoot a traditional bow to hunt, like I would have a cheap one and build some arrows for it and shoot it as like part of your regimen to like get locked in, because the amount of focus I have to shoot that thing well, like whenever I translate that amount of focus to my compound, dude, I'm dropping dime pieces. Like I'm stacking arrows. Now I'm not shooting out any further than like 32, 33 yards at this point. That's what I have like in my yard that I can shoot comfortably. I'll go to my buddy's place and shoot some longer distance here, like once I get back from vacation. But my groups now at that distance are better than they have been the past 3 years. And it's just because I'm so locked in, with, focusing on the target and my pin floating and stuff like that. So, but doing that a lot. As far as physical for me, man, like it's all just jujitsu. I mean, so I do jujitsu like 8 hours a week, and lift 3 hours a week, roughly, or like lift 2.5 hours a week. I have 4 training jujitsu days and I have 2 lift days. And those lift days also have, like a 10-minute interval sprint, assault bike or fan bike, wind bike sessions that I do for additional cardio work. So I feel pretty good, but the one thing I am going to work on, and I told myself once, like I just got a new pair of boots because my boots were killing my feet, my previous ones. So I got a new pair of boots that I'm going to break in, some Zomberlins, some of their new ones they just recently came out with. I forget what the name of them is. Super comfortable so far, but I need to break through. That would be an easy break in, but when I get back from vacation, it'll be my frame with like the holder, the basket, and I'll throw some like landscaping stone packs in that, and probably just get up in the mornings like during the week and walk the dog, like just like a mile walk through the park and that's by my house and stuff like that, just to kind of get used to having weight on my back. And then I'll start going on the weekends to just like hit the one mountain that's close by to kind of do up and downs, like this mountain trail, to kind of get ready. And that's less for cardio, more for just working the specific muscles that I'm going to use, like hiking up and down mountains.
Yeah.
Because overall it's like I'm in pretty good shape. And so now it's more for me just like tweaking, the rucking component of it to work those little foot muscles that you don't always use, that always get tired and will be sore and stuff like that. And the lower back muscles that you use, to carry a pack around that you don't use otherwise, and stuff like that. And so that's mainly, what I got going on for preparation, but no big gear adds like you. I feel pretty confident with all this stuff. I might need to get some more arrows. That's the one thing I might need to get. But otherwise I know what broadheads I'm shooting. I'm not changing any of that. And, yeah, that's about it, man. That's what I got going on. What broadhead are you shooting this year?
Well, the tried and true, those Afflictor K2s I've been shooting, but I am
Mhm.
messing with some other stuff. I'm not sure why. Probably just maybe I'm bored. I don't know.
Right.
I feel like I'm so far ahead of the bell curve that I need to tinker with something, which I
Right.
usually always do. But there's a there's a head that um, some guys that I know shoot, and the design's pretty intriguing. They're made by a company called Interlock, and it's designed with a cullet system where you can essentially tune that broadhead with its components, which is kind of intriguing. So I've been researching those a little bit, watching some torture tests, and Lusk Archery on YouTube does a fantastic job of having like a test standard and parameters to kind of equally test things. It's not like us or me or just shooting stuff into ballistic gel and through steel. Like this guy has it down to a science, and they perform pretty well for him. Ryan and the guys in my elk group really like him, so I'm just gonna mess with them, see if I like him or not. But I've shot that Afflictor K2 head for I don't know the last handful of years, and like it works, it flies. So it's more me just messing with stuff than anything.
Right.
But to your comment about the pack training, like I would encourage anybody that is a new Western hunter, like that is a real thing. You need to get used to carrying your pack with weight. And I've done it. I've done it both ways. I've done like the progression of carrying 20 pounds, 30 pounds, 40 pounds, and then experience that heavy load once, of heavy load of like 80 plus pounds, like simulating a pack out. And then last year I carried heavyweight all the time, and it jacked me up. I would, so like anybody that out there that is a new Western hunter and gets into pack training or rucking or whatever the case is, like don't let your ego get in the way of saying, oh, I'm going to train with 80 pounds. I'm going to train with 100 pounds. I'm going to train with 120 pounds all the time, because it's not good for you. And at least it wasn't good for me.
Yeah. Usually my weight is I usually just carry 40 like all the
Yeah.
time. That's what I do because it's more about like my hope is I only have to endure that heavy pack once. And that's and I'll grind my way through it, and do what I got to do to get the animal out and stuff like that.
Yep.
But it's more about I'm less concerned about that than I am just like the day-to-day climbing the elevation and stuff like that. And that's more so, what I'm trying to kind of just get ready for.
Yeah.
And I find that it's helpful. That's what I did the last time, and I felt good. Outside of my feet getting tore up from my boots. I think I just have like one foot's messed up, dude, because it's like the boots fit odd on only that foot, and it's only ever that foot that gets hot spots. And so I think I just have like a foot, that foot is like shaped just in a way that like, because it doesn't matter what boots I put on. Like I have like a little bit of heel slip on my left foot all the time. And I wear Kenetrex hard scrabbles. I've worn those for a while, and they're broken in, and I love them to whitetail hunt and stuff like that, especially like in rockier like areas and stuff like that. But whenever I'm out in like Kansas or whatever, it's like I like to wear like a hiker, like just something that's light and something that bends. So I'm going to be on my knees. I want my toes to be able to bend. So I don't want like a lot of flex, And so that's why I got those Zomblins, because they're more like hikers. And where I'm hunting in Idaho, I mean, it's steep, but it's not like super rocky. Like it's not a lot of scree and stuff like that. And so I was like, I don't need as much like stiffness. And so I ended up buying a pair of Crispies and trying those on, and I still had like heel slip in those. And then I sent those back and tried these Zomberlins, and I don't have as much heel slip because they fit more like a hiker. So they're like really kind of like tight, you know what I mean? Like the type of material that's being used. But I still have even just like a little bit of heel slip in those yet. And I tried like all kinds of like, I found some different lacing configurations to use to kind of help with it a little bit, but it's not 100% perfect. So it's like, I'm just going to have to probably, put some moleskin on that part of my foot or whatever, and just, let it ride, be as good as it can be.
Yeah. Yeah. Dude, a lot of, we talked Western hunting up like it's this big thing and you got to prep for it and you got to be He-Man to go do it.
Yeah.
In reality, at least for me, regardless of how much I train, my legs are still on fire. If I'm on a hard hike, I have to focus on my breathing. I can't be bullshitting with the guy that I'm hunting with. It's more about mindset, because the entire thing is like, it's not about being comfortable. It's about being able to endure the suck, I guess. It's like type 2 fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. It's like, doesn't matter how much preparation I do. I try to do enough to where I feel good about going into it. You know what I mean? It's like where it's like, all right, I feel ready. Like I feel like I'm good. Like nothing hurts. You know, that's the biggest thing is going out, trying not to be injured. Last time I went, I had torn like some rib cartilage in training and stuff like that before I went, which was like not ideal, you know, to bust up your ribs and stuff before I went out. But yeah, it's like the biggest thing is just try to be as healthy as you can when you go out there and do some preparation to get ready so you feel confident. You know, and that's the biggest thing because it's going to suck regardless. Like I've not been on one of those hunts yet out west that hasn't had an element of suck to it, you know. So just expect it, know that it's going to suck at some point, and it'll be all good, man. But speaking of being all good, dude, I've kept you here getting close to an hour and a half. We rained on everybody's parade earlier, you know, so we can probably our work here is done, you know. But before I let you get out of here, let folks know where they can follow along with you and all the different stuff that you have going on at Exodus.
Yeah, everything is at Exodus Outdoor Gear website, social channels, YouTube, podcasts, yada, yada, yada. It's pretty easy to find. You type Exodus Outdoor Gear into Google, and there'll be a plethora of populated hits.
Nice. Awesome, man. Well, hey, we'll have you back on here a little later in the summer before we both leave for Idaho to do our goals, dreams, and aspirations podcast. So this is like a little extra dose of Mr. Sylvester today. You know, so we'll do another one. But always look forward to chatting with you, brother. Always good catching up, and looking forward to hunting with you this year. And I'll talk to you soon.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Osseo Gear, Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see y'all.